Hey.
Oh, hey. Wow. You're wearing your hat.
Well, yes.
Chris Anderson, not in London. But
not in London, but Chris Anderson is, I think, at this point in Kyoto or Hiroshima. And, well, I never wear my History Happy Hour hat, but my wife thought that I should bring a baseball-like hat for this trip because I go all kinds of places. So there we go.
So you're out there promoting the program.
There we go.
Yep. Wearing logo wear, which is very rare.
Not me. Very not me.
Yep. Very not you. I expect lots of pictures and put those up.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody.
And you are still in Chicago?
Oh, yes. I'm still in Chicago.
I had to ask.
Holding down the fort here in the United States, representing History Happy Hour, the Ghost Army, and, just in general, the integrity of loving and appreciating and honestly telling history.
Oh, hey. They need some background music when you talk like that.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody, to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Tours for helping us bring it to you. And check out their rich offering of military history tours, some of which are led by Chris Anderson.
Hot dog.
His History Happy Hour hat, or sometimes. And me. And that's at StephenAmbroseTours.com. And guys, whether you're watching live or you're watching on replay or you're listening on the HHH
podcast,
we're glad you're here. This week, we're going to be talking about General Meade at Gettysburg.
Yes.
We probably don't do enough on the Civil War, but we're bringing back this great conversation that we had with Kent Masterson Brown, and I think you'll enjoy that.
Which, by the way, guys, I know that we probably should. So if there's some Civil War books that you're reading that are new and out there,
please let us know. Absolutely. We are interested in doing more. And believe it or not, we try to keep an eye on all the books out there, but there's just so many history books being written. Yeah, it's really hard for us to keep track of it all. So you can email us at info@historyhappyhour.com, and we would be happy to take a look at that.
We'd appreciate the help.
Yeah, we need the help.
We need the help.
We need the help. We need you also to support us if you can.
Yeah, see how
Patreon.com. Yeah, good transition. You can be a top shelf patron or any level of patron, and we do appreciate all of our patrons by going to patreon.com and clicking History Happy Hour. And thank you. Thank you. So shall we get on with this exciting episode?
I think we probably should.
Okay. Hang on to your hats, everybody. Chris is going to give me the cue, and we're going to go.
The bar is open.
The bar is open, and today our topic is General George Meade, who's the victor at Gettysburg, but often doesn't get all the credit that perhaps he deserves for that victory for the Union Army, or any credit, or hardly remembered at all. And so our guest today is Kent Masterson Brown, who is the author of a book called Meade at Gettysburg, A Study in Command. And Kent is the author, I think, of 6 Civil War history books for which he has received rave reviews and numerous national awards. He also writes, hosts, and produced award-winning documentary films for public television. He's got 3 about the American Revolution that are in the works. He's a very popular speaker, and he's also a lawyer who received his JD from Washington and Lee University and practiced law for 37 years. And so I don't know how much of that bio I got right, but
it was 47 years.
Well, I just want to say you didn't like let on. I didn't read the whole bio. You went to WNL?
I did.
I'm sorry. I went to Hampton, Sydney. I don't know.
Oh, no.
I know.
Really?
We're going to have to cut this short.
Our arch rival.
Oh, no. Oh, no. So, hey, Kent, did you bring a cocktail today?
I certainly did. My favorite old-fashioned. So
okay. I have to,
if everybody else is doing it, I'll do it. So
there you go. I've just got a beer today, the normal.
Okay. All
Christopher, what are you doing?
Well, I just have water because I was at the pub earlier today, so I thought I should probably.
Oh, you're tamping
Yeah,
down there.
yeah, we're tapering off, but I'll be drinking in spirit.
Ken, when we think of the great generals of the Civil War, somehow George Meade often doesn't make the list. We think of names like Grant, Lee, Stonewall Jackson, General Longstreet. And here's George Meade, and he won the biggest battle of the Civil War, and yet he often doesn't get put on the same level. So, A, why is that? And B, is you're a lawyer, so is your book an argument to the appeals court for general on behalf of General Meade?
Let me first answer part one of those questions, and that is, why is he not remembered like others are? And the answer to that rests, frankly, in the pursuit of Lee's army. As I'll point out as we go along, his pursuit of Lee was a terrific one, but one that was hampered by the serious lack of fodder for the horses, shoes for the horses, and food and frankly, shoes for the men. This is a problem we can go into in much more detail. But as a consequence, Meade, in trying to pursue Lee, lost some 12,000 horses in that effort. And it was because of just lack of fodder. But as a result of this, and he not striking Lee when Lee was on the Downsville line between Hagerstown and the Potomac River, because he didn't strike Lee and, quote, destroy him, I'm using the words of Abraham Lincoln now, then because of that, and because of Lincoln's use of those terms, Meade just simply became shelved at the bottom. No one would ever try to take up his position in anything. No one would try to talk favorably about him. By the way, that's a photograph of him taken during the campaign. This is in Frederick, Maryland, en route to confronting Lee at the Downsville line. That's when that was taken, the 7th or 8th of July. So that's what he looked like during the course of this campaign. But it was the fact that Lincoln and his confidants just let it be known publicly they had no confidence in him. And so Meade suffered, and he suffered for years. And you mentioned about me writing an appellate brief here for him. What I did in this book was I resolved I would not look at one after action report, because too many of these officers just tried to make themselves look better or try to cover up what they did that was not very pretty. I didn't use any memoirs at all, unless they just happened to be a memoir of they seeing Meade somewhere that might be of interest. Instead, what I used were only his orders, his circulars, his letters written at the time of the events that we talk about. And those include letters to his wife, Margaretta. Now, when you do that, and you look at only what he wrote at the time of these events, he comes over as an entirely different person, just entirely different. And to use documents, in particular documents, that were generated at the time he was making decisions, is really an ancient use of documents that were referred to in the law as the best evidence. They're the best evidence because they're written at the moment. There's no time for reflection, no time to make something up, anything like this. They're written at the moment. And when you look at just those, you know exactly what he had in mind. Every single step of not only the campaign to Pennsylvania, but the fighting at Gettysburg and then the pursuit of Lee. And I hate to use in many ways the word pursuit, because what Meade actually does is move along a parallel line on the east side of the mountains where Lee's army has crossed the mountains and is on the west side moving toward Hagerstown. There you go. There's a good
You
example.
kind of see it here in this map.
You can see Lee's army here over on the left, and then you can see all the different courses taken by the 6th Corps in Meade's army until they get to Middletown. And at Middletown is where they then move west, go through Turner Pass, that was made, of course, famous during the Antietam campaign, and they confront Lee along the Potomac River. And that was frankly, a masterful operation. However, as I stated before, Meade suffers the loss of 12,000 horses in that operation. And someone asked, well, how do you know that? Well, among the things I searched for in writing this book were the records and documents and letters of Montgomery Meigs and his subordinates. Montgomery Meigs was the quartermaster general of the army. And his assistant quartermaster general wrote a report of what happened to the horses in the Army of the Potomac during the Gettysburg campaign. And that report illustrated that he found that there were 14,000 horses lost in the Gettysburg campaign altogether. 1,900 were lost on the battlefield. The rest were lost in the pursuit. Now that's an astronomical amount of loss. And it all boils down to the fact that they could not feed them. And the reason they couldn't feed them is that when Meade had to move the entire army to Gettysburg, you might show one of those maps of he having to move all his corps to Gettysburg. His right flank, holding Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill, were under attack from the moment Meade arrived himself on the wee hours of July 2nd, all the way until the battle was over. And that you can see where it reads Two Taverns down to Union Mills in Westminster in that map. Westminster was Meade's base of supply. He moved the army up to the Pipe Creek line, and he wanted to see if he could lure Lee's army to fight him along the Pipe Creek line. But unfortunately, if you look at the arrow over on the left going up to Gettysburg, that's John Reynolds. John Reynolds and the 1st Corps, he takes only one division of the 1st Corps and just heads to Gettysburg when he's given the orders to go to Gettysburg. And Meade sends him a separate order. It's actually a letter. And I found the letter in the National Archives. And the letter just simply reads, and I'll just kind of paraphrase here. He said to him, my dear general, they're very close, by the way, these two. My dear general, I want you to go to Gettysburg and get on the enemy's roads and routes of communication. That's the Chambersburg Pike. Meade knows that much, that the Confederate Army is stretched out from Chambersburg all the way to York on that pike. Now, go up there. If you could get a whole Army Corps on that pike, then you would cause the enemy to collect in front of you, because they don't want that. They've got to communicate. And so Meade's idea was to send Reynolds up there, put him out, stretch him out on the Chambersburg Pike, and try to cause the enemy to collect in front of him. Then Meade says this in that letter: if the enemy comes after you, collects and comes after you, I want you to withdraw to Emmitsburg. I get that. Now, we've seen all this stuff over the years about Reynolds going up there and choosing to fight because he has high ground behind him and all this stuff. No. George Meade emphatically told him, under no uncertain terms, that you're to go to Gettysburg, but if you're attacked, you are to withdraw to Emmitsburg. Now, someone would ask, well, what kind of a stratagem is that? Well, it's as old as Karl von Clausewitz. It's as old as Antoine de Jomini. This is called the operational use of an advance corps. You send an advance corps ahead of the rest of the army for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to draw the enemy to collect in front of it and then pull back. Hopefully the enemy would follow you. And if they did, they would follow Reynolds. And frankly, this was true on the east of Gettysburg. There were other corps, the 5th Corps, the 6th Corps were also directed to move forward. They were also admonished by Meade in written orders that if they are attacked, they are to withdraw to Taneytown or wherever they originated along the Pipe Creek line.
So, but I don't want to get too far. Before we get into the weeds of the battle, though, I think we should give some folks who aren't maybe Civil War experts or even that knowledgeable kind of a baseline. So let's back up a bit and let's just tell us a bit about Meade and maybe a little bit about how he finds himself in command and what he doesn't expect to be made commander. He's made commander. What's the state of the army when he's given this command? What is the army's impression of him, and what's the situation that he's facing?
Okay, well, George Meade was ordered to become commander of the Army of the Potomac on June 28, 1863. The army was in and around Frederick, Maryland at the time, and this was not any suggestion that he become commander. In fact, the orders were regarded as peremptory. He would replace Joe Hooker and as commander of the Army of the Potomac. Meade, when he was presented with the fact that he has been named commander of the Army of the Potomac, before those words ever got out of the mouth of the aides that brought that message to him, he asked if he was under arrest. So you can imagine the relationships that had been going on between the White House and the command of the Army of the Potomac up to that point in time. He actually thought he was under arrest. But he took over command of the army in Frederick. And what about this army? This army had not won an engagement against its principal enemy in 21 months. That's pretty grim. And on top of that, as of March 1863, the Lincoln administration and Congress had instituted a draft because no one would volunteer to fight in these armies. Why would you when they just consistently lose and lose lots of men? And all you see, you look at the New York Times in 1862 and 3, and the front page is nothing but casualties. Why would anybody want to volunteer for this army? And so he was commanding an army that, again, had not won anything up to this point in time. And he was commanding an army that was seriously depleted and at the time simply had not been given any kind of supplies necessary to continue the invasion of Pennsylvania or the rest of Maryland. And there was a wagon train of some 150 wagons coming out of Baltimore on the national road toward Frederick on the 28th of June, when 3 brigades of Confederate cavalry led by Jeb Stuart himself attacked it and seized that train. Now, those were all the quartermaster's stores that had been ordered by the Army of the Potomac. So on his first day as commander, that's what he had to face. The question is that army ever going to get any supplies to it? And the answer that Meade will ultimately get to that is no. Not anything.
So
they
in a lot,
didn't have tents, nothing.
So in a lot of ways, this kind of goes against, our impression of the Civil War is very often kind of the ragged rebels and the poor, starving Confederate army.
Yeah.
But the Union Army, at this point, it sounds, as I was reading the book, they're in worse shape than the Confederate Army in a lot of ways.
They are. You're absolutely correct. The other thing you see Meade do when he takes over command, he issues 3 requisitions for shoes. And you total up all the requisitions, the numbers he wants out of those 3 requisitions. And it's 51,000 pair of shoes. These are for the men. There are 91,000 troops in the Army of the Potomac. 51,000 either don't have shoes at all, or the shoes they got, they can't wear. So you're right. I mean, not only is the Army without supplies, forage for the horses and food for the men, but they don't have any shoes. This is a half shoeless Army. And it's hard to imagine in their home state of Pennsylvania. But it's what it was.
So one of the standard knocks on Meade is that he is timid. That he's talking a good game in some of his dispatches, but he doesn't really want to come to grips with Lee at Gettysburg, and he's only very reluctantly sucked into this battle against his will. So how accurate is that? What's your point of view on that?
It's as inaccurate as anything. And I'll tell you.
Well, okay.
It really is. It's totally inaccurate. And what I found with George Meade at Gettysburg was that this guy, on July 2nd, was out along the Wheatfield Road.
And July 2nd, we should say, is the second day of this 3-day battle.
Right. And this is where James Longstreet's corps assaults, first of all, the 3rd Corps of Daniel Sickles. And then, as we know, Sickles is reinforced by the 5th Corps, by the elements of the 2nd Corps. And it is a bloodbath out there. But the point is that those reinforcements from the 5th Corps, and by the way, the entire 5th Corps was sent over there. Then the elements of divisions of the 2nd Corps, particularly Caldwell's division of the 2nd Corps, was sent over there. And who was it who directed each brigade into the fighting from a position along the Wheatfield Road, right behind the famous Wheatfield? Was George Meade. That's how far front that man was. And, the Army of the Potomac had never seen anything like that before. It would probably never see anything like that again, where your commander, the operational commander of the Army, is out there putting one brigade in after another. And, in the process of this, it's amazing Meade wasn't wounded or killed. But as the fighting started to gravitate north, when the Confederate attacks were blunted finally along the Wheatfield and at Little Round Top, it was Meade, by the way, who sent those troops to the summit of Little Round Top. He did it himself, directed them exactly where to go. And but the fighting would move north toward the center of the Army at the angle. And Meade was behind those, putting in one brigade after another, all the way up the defense line set up along Cemetery Ridge until he got to the angle. And there a bullet came in, just missed his leg, tore his trousers, entered through the saddle of his horse, Old Baldy, and actually penetrated Old Baldy's stomach. And Meade narrowly missed that kind of a really desperate wound in that. but it shows you how far in front that man was. So that's not the action of a timid guy. This is a tough, tough soldier.
And I just want to
supposed to do. Yeah.
I just want to mention that old Baldy's pretty tough too, because Meade thinks that he's done for, but in fact he's not, and he will live long enough that he will be at George Meade's funeral.
He will.
So
he will.
Old
he
Baldy
will.
hung on there.
What is fun, Rick, is to follow Meade's letters to Margaretta, not only about what's happening in the army, but about old Baldy. He's got to tell her everything about old Baldy that brings her up to date, until finally, he's at Frederick and he says, Margaretta, I think he's going to live.
Wow.
They were really attached.
So, Kevin, I want to, from what we were talking about, and I know we pulled you back a bit, but so he's comes into command on the 28th. He's kind of thrust into the situation. He's marching an army that isn't in the best of condition, and he doesn't really want to fight at Gettysburg. So, how does he develop a plan, or is he reacting to Lee, or is he actually coming up with his plan on the fly? How does that come about?
He is reacting to what happened on July 1. This is where John Reynolds goes forward with one of his 3 divisions. And John Reynolds knows exactly what the orders are. Those are the ones I've mentioned that I found in the National Archives. And they're also in the official records of the War of the Rebellion. But he was supposed to get on the roads and routes of communication, and if the enemy attacks, he's supposed to go back to Emmitsburg. Well, the enemy attacks, and he attacks, and ultimately he's killed in combat. John Reynolds is. And behind him comes the 11th Corps, which Meade ordered to be behind the 1st Corps. The 11th Corps is then deployed north of Gettysburg. The 1st Corps is ultimately deployed, and Doubleday brings up the other 2 divisions west of Gettysburg. And they are then attacked on all sides and routed. And those remnants of those 2 corps flow through Gettysburg to the heights, to Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Ridge. And Meade, when he learns of what has happened, then orders the army, all of his corps, to Gettysburg. And so he reacts to what happened on July 1. This was not Meade's intention. He knew nothing about Gettysburg, had never been there before in his life. And he wanted to fight the enemy along Pipe Creek. And he set up everything to do that, and he sent advance corps forward with the idea that they would lure the enemy toward Pipe Creek if attacked. And he was playing by the book. Those are the way Dennis Hart Mahan, his professor of military science at West Point, who wrote a book about just the use of an advance corps. And Meade's applying what he knows the book to say about luring an enemy to fight you. And he was stalled by it. And it was foreclosed because of what happened on July 1.
So I want to remind everybody that we are speaking today to Kent Masterson Brown, who is the author of Meade at Gettysburg, a study in command. And so we're talking about General George Meade and his handling of the Union Army at the famous Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. So Meade arrives on the battlefield midnight or post-midnight. It's the fighting on July 1 has died down. It is late at night. What does he do upon arriving and in the hours of the next day? And you've talked a little bit about this, but what does he do to try to exert control over the battlefield? And is he able to exert control, or is he really in the position where he's constantly, all he can do is react to the attacks that are coming from Robert E. Lee's army?
Well, no, he first takes control of the army, our elements of the army that are at Gettysburg. He sets up the defense lines along Culp's Hill, along Cemetery Hill. And by the way, those are very defensible positions. The trouble is they're right on the Baltimore Pike runs right behind them. And so long as they're under attack, that Baltimore Pike's going to be shut down. But nevertheless, Meade's more concerned here about making sure the army can defend itself. And so he sets up the defense lines along Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, and then all the way down Cemetery Ridge. And it's interesting, though. Everyone says, oh, they've got the high ground, and this is all great. Meade did not react that way to this. There was nothing else he could do at Gettysburg other than to set those lines up and try to defend a position to keep the army intact. But there were times where he was spotted by O.O. Howard, for instance, who remembered him saying, this is one area where I did use a comment made by someone in a kind of memoir. And that is, he heard Meade say to himself, I don't like this position. We can be turned on our left. In other words, Culp's Hill's fine, Cemetery Hill's fine, and some of Cemetery Ridge is. But the rest of Cemetery Ridge is vulnerable to attack. That's your left flank. And not only vulnerable to attack, but could be rolled up if it was attacked. And that was a worry for him. Okay, we can defend these heights, but can we defend that? And he was not so sure they could. And by the way, another senior officer who said the same thing was Winfield Scott Hancock, who came on the battlefield saying the very same thing. I'm afraid, he said, that we will be turned on our left. And so high ground is great, but unless you're defending high ground all across the place, you've got areas that are much lower that you've also got to protect. It's not so good. And Meade was reacting to that. But what it took, frankly, was the personal willpower of this guy to get out there and not only send troops into where he thinks we have to win. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. We either win here, like in the wheat field on the left flank, or we'll lose this thing. He sends them in himself. And so the troops see him. They see their operational commander directing, and their bullets are flying around him. And they're inspired by that. But we see the results of it. They absolutely blunted those attacks on July 2nd. And those attacks against the center of the line, which is where Hancock and Meade both thought they were vulnerable. And they did that by just pouring in reinforcements from the 1st Corps, what was left of it, from the 11th Corps, what was left of it, into where the angle is, to try to help bolster those lines. And they won. They won. And those were the big wins in this thing. It's not the action on July 3rd, the Pickett's attack. It's these were the ones that were essential to win. And it's all George Meade.
But so what? We had a question from one of our guests, Kent, and this is I'm gonna tack on my own little addition. But it's not just Meade. There are corps commanders there, and Richard Snyder has asked. He said he loves your book, but he was wondering if you could speak about Meade's relationship with his corps commanders during the battle. And I would add to that, maybe make a special emphasis on. There's one corps commander in particular that causes him some heartache, and that's the commander of the 3rd Corps. So maybe you could get into that a little bit and talk about, his relationship with his subordinates, because he has to manage them in this great fight.
Meade's relationship with his old Army subordinates. These are the career Army officers, Hancock, frankly, Howard, Slocum. Those old Army types Meade got along with. Now, there were times that there was friction between Meade and for instance, Slocum, General Slocum. There were episodes where Meade got testy with subordinates. However, they all seemed to rally around the cause on the battlefield. The exception to all of this is Daniel Sickles, who of course has no military background at all. He was not one Meade favored at all. Didn't like the company he kept, and actually said that in a letter to Margaretta, that I don't like the company he keeps. And at Gettysburg, Sickles' Third Corps was directed by George Meade to hold a position, quote, to the left of General Hancock, the Second Corps, along Cemetery Hill. And those orders were explicit. You are to line up to the left of Winfield Hancock's Second Corps. Now, Meade even had his chief topographical engineer draw a map for each one of those corps commanders showing where Meade wants them to align themselves, and present a copy of those maps to each one of the corps commanders. And so Sickles not only heard it from George Meade orally, where he wanted him to line up, but he got a map showing where he was supposed to be. And as the day progressed, early in the morning, July 2nd, and the day began to go to noon and early in the afternoon, Sickles unilaterally determines he can move his corps up to the Emmitsburg Road because he didn't like the position he was assigned. Well, Meade calls a council of war, and the council of war is meeting in the Leicester House. And all the corps commanders are there except Daniel Sickles. Where is Daniel Sickles? Even though he got the order to appear at the council of war, he is moving the Third Corps from Cemetery Ridge to the Emmitsburg Road. And General Warren, Meade's chief,
which is by the way, so just to say that, which is basically moving it about a half mile forward and leaving the connection between the rest of the army wide open. And
wide open.
Yeah,
precisely. And General Warren comes into the conference, and he announces to all the corps commanders and to George Meade that Sickles is moving his corps out to the Emmitsburg Road. Now you can imagine, Meade had a temper. I can tell you that. He had a temper. He could explode. And Meade became absolutely unglued. He gets out, gets on his horse, rides along the Emmitsburg Road, goes up to Sickles, and demands an explanation for what he's doing. He said, "I just think this is better than being down there." And Meade just exploded at him. Your orders were explicit. And by the way, Meade not only told him in the beginning himself where he wanted him, gave him a map, but he had his son, who was served on his staff, go and ask Sickles before Sickles made a move, is there anything more we can do for you? and got little or nothing from Sickles. Sickles rode to the Leicester House himself before the conference and stood on the porch of the Leicester House, and Meade directed him by showing him, I want your corps right there. And you can't get any more explicit than this. And Sickles rides back, and in spite of all of that, just directs his corps out on the Emmitsburg Road. Now he's created a real tactical problem for George Meade. He's opened up for the enemy to strike that Third Corps where it is, unsupported by anybody, and roll the left flank of the Army of the Potomac up. And this is what causes Meade to himself go out there and begin directing the traffic, because that's the only way he believes that we can save this. And it just shows you the grit that George Meade had as a commander. He became the tactical commander of the Army.
In the fighting on day 2, which is the day we're talking about here,
Yes.
Sickles has gone out there with his line. He's attacked by Longstreet. There is very bloody fighting, terrible casualties. The Confederates manage to pierce the Union line, but they are driven back. And at the end of this awful second day of Gettysburg, Meade calls his officers together again for a council of war that night. And I would say, as it's put in the history books, he asks them whether they should stay and fight or whether they should abandon the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And so, did he seriously consider at the end of these first 2 days of fighting, of what turns out to be a great Union victory, did he consider at this point seriously the idea of retreating?
No, I don't think so. I actually think that that conference boiled down to him asking his subordinate commanders their assessment of where that army was at the end of of July 2nd. And I think any good operational commander would want to do that. Meade was known for making up his own mind about things, but then asking his subordinates their opinion about what they think the Army should do. And let me give you a good example of that at Gettysburg. And that is on July 4, when Meade determines to pursue the enemy. He called a council of war then too. And he asked everyone what they thought the Army should do. Should we pursue Lee directly, which means follow him through the mountains? All of them said no. And Meade agreed. Should we pursue him along a parallel route? And all of them said in variations, yes. Well, Meade had already sent 2 letters to 2 division commanders in the Department of the Susquehanna, telling them that I am tomorrow, this is written on late July 3rd, I am going to pursue the enemy along a parallel course to Middletown, Maryland, and will cross the South Mountain Range there and confront Lee along the Potomac River. I mean, he already written to 2 different division commanders in the Department of the Susquehanna.
So then why is he asking? Why is he then asking his generals? Why is he doing this?
I think it's a matter of respect for them, for their opinions, and he's there to be moved if they have a suggestion to make that he feels is meritorious and deserves consideration. But this guy's already made up his mind. And it's interesting that all the other corps commanders responded by saying, no, let's move along a parallel line. Let's move to Westminster. Let's move to Middletown. Let's move toward Emmitsburg. Let's don't go across the mountains following Lee. And It just conformed to exactly what Meade had in mind. You got to remember, these guys were all trained the same way, trained by the same people. They're all students of Dennis Hart Mahan, at West Point. They all think alike. They've been around with one another a long time. And so Meade probably doesn't feel he's running any danger in asking them. But he will. He'll ask them.
So
The other thing to remember, too, is that George Meade is a major general, as are every one of his corps commanders. He has just been named commander of the Army of the Potomac. And you would think, oh, he's now superior to all of them. Well, no, they don't regard that. He's kind of one of them who just got boosted up. He was commander of the 5th Corps until this thing began. And so Meade is conscious of that, he's not going to be dictatorial. He's going to have his opinions. And if his opinions he thinks are the right ones and theirs are not, he'll follow his own. But he'll ask them. And I think that's a judicious thing to do.
So Ken, and with apologies to all of our viewers in the South, Robert E. Lee launches an attack on the 3rd day, which doesn't work out so well for him.
Right.
The Confederate Army is stopped, and it begins to retire. And so I guess I want to touch on this as we're kind of getting to the end of the hour. One of the controversies surrounding Meade is he doesn't pursue Lee with perhaps the zeal that people that aren't there would like. So could you tell us a little bit about kind of the post-battle operation and where it quote unquote goes wrong, and does Meade miss an opportunity here?
And can I add to your question, Chris?
Add to it, yeah. Pile on.
No. Well, right. So we have this great quote from your book of what Lincoln tells his aide John Hay, that sort of sums up what he felt about the battle. We had only to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours, and nothing I could say or do would make the army move. So that's Lincoln's point of view.
Right.
What's the story there?
Well, they could stretch forth their hands, but they wouldn't touch Robert E. Lee. That's the bottom line. And again, Meade, would not pursue Lee through the mountains. You never pursue a retreating army through mountains from their rear, mainly because they're always higher than you are. And they can hold you back with much smaller numbers of people than you've got by simply being above you. So you never do that. What you do is you follow a parallel course. That's why Meade had no problem saying what he thought about this to his corps commanders, because every one of them agreed with him. You follow a parallel course, and then you find a way to get across the mountains without confronting an enemy, the rear of the enemy, and then meet him somewhere where you can actually attempt to do something that could stop him or defeat him or whatever. But the problem with Meade trying to pursue this enemy along a parallel course, or however, was the fact that his horses weren't fed. And they were dying. It's interesting, that report of the assistant quartermaster general gives you the whole story. But I found even a diary of a soldier in the 39th Pennsylvania Infantry who wrote in his diary down at the Potomac River, it's the 12th of July. And he writes in his diary, "The men are hungry. The horses are blue. Hundreds die every day." You don't feed a horse. Horse requires, under Army regulations, 14 pounds of oats and 14 pounds of hay a day, according to 1861 Army regulations. And you don't feed that horse for 3 days, and that horse will become lame when you ask him to do the work these armies are asking him to do. And so here you go, these horses haven't been fed at all in this entire campaign. And they're not being fed on the pursuit. And so he's gonna wind up losing 12,000 of them
But
during his pursuit.
One question that one of our guests had asked, speaking to this point, is couldn't they have lived off the land? Is that a possibility, or there were too many of them, or?
In fact, it's interesting. While they were at Gettysburg, they were grazing those horses as best they could on lands, farmlands, where they could find fodder in those farms. They seized them, but it was not enough. When you have 60,000 horses and mules, that's how many you had. And you got to put 14 pounds of oats and 14 pounds of hay a day down each one of the horses. A mule takes a mixed grain, but regulations required that's what you had to do to keep that horse in the game. When you can't do that, now you're going to suffer. There's just no way around it. And as a consequence, the Army moved as fast as they could go. But you can't go real fast when you're losing your horses that much. And no one's ever brought that out before. This is the campaign was kind of for Meade a logistical nightmare. A nightmare.
So we have a question that just came in from a viewer, and it's a long one, and I've only read the first half of it, so we'll hope it good. But Paul Lawson says, can you address Lee retreating from the field with a beaten army after Gettysburg, which is universally judged a Union victory, whereas Lee retreats with a beaten army after Antietam, which is still often considered a tactical tie? Mm-hmm. So what's the difference there?
Between his retreat after Antietam and one he's close to the Potomac River at Antietam. I mean, it's very close. A much different setup there. This one he's going to have to recross the South Mountain Range.
But I guess the question is why is Lee's retreat at Gettysburg, why is that judged a Union victory, whereas, according to Paul asking the question, essentially the same thing happens at Antietam, and that's judged to be, that's not really a Union victory, it's more of a tie.
Yeah. I don't know if I could really effectively answer that, to be honest. I mean, it is the way we've received it all these years, that Gettysburg was a Union victory. And Lee on the 4th of July began to retreat out of Pennsylvania. But as I write in that book I wrote on the retreat from Gettysburg, by the way, I'll give up the idea that was anything else but a Union victory at Gettysburg. However, I do not believe it was the turning point of the war, like people like to say it is. And the reason it is not is that Lee's foraging in Pennsylvania, which he was doing 2 weeks before the engagement at Gettysburg, and even while the battle was going on, they were foraging 50 miles behind the Confederate lines. So that by the time he retreats, he's retreating with 30,000 head of cattle, then 57 miles of supply trains filled with purchased, impressed, and confiscated goods. This guy has been able to capture for himself the food, the fodder necessary to keep that army in the field, in spite of the loss. So, I mean, this is not, it's okay, it's a Union victory, but you can't say it's the turning point of the war by any stretch of the imagination. It's going to help Lee begin the operation that's going to last, this war is going to last 2 more years. And much of it because of what he was able to do in Pennsylvania before and during and the battle and during the withdrawal. And he foraged everywhere. And that's the big difference.
We have like about 1 minute left. Chris, do you have a last question you wanted to put in there?
Well, yeah, I think that given, and I really encourage people to read this book to get a much different view of the Battle of Gettysburg. But where should Meade fit in the pantheon of Civil War generals? I mean, was he adequate? Do we not give him enough credit? Was he brilliant? Should we think more highly of him? Where should we place him?
Well, we definitely should think more highly of him than we've done before. I can tell you that. I think he fits in the high ranks of generals in the Union generals in the Civil War, and he was never once made commander of the Army of the Potomac. He had it all the way to the end. He was commander of the Army of the Potomac, even though Ulysses Grant becomes basically the operational commander of those armies in Virginia. Still, George Meade was commander of the Army of the Potomac all the way to the end. And I find him to be an extraordinarily capable soldier, a capable leader, capable tactical man, and also an exceptional operational commander. The guy seemed to have a grip for it, and had he not suffered so much withering attack after Gettysburg as he did, we all would say what a great job this man did. But he came under such attack, and it was from lofty heights. I mean, from the President of the United States, and it wouldn't be too long before he would be the assassinated president, the martyr for the whole thing. And who's going to go against him? Who's going to contradict what Lincoln thought? That's a hard thing to do, and but it's taken a long time to finally bring George out.
But there you go. That's what you've done. So we want to thank Kent Masterson Brown for joining us today. He is the author of the book Meade at Gettysburg, A Study in Command. Definitely a book worth looking at. I got through it, although I did drop it in the bathtub, so its pages are all swollen. So,
well, thanks for that, Rick.
But there you go, a little window into my life. Kent Masterson Brown, thank you so much for joining us today.
And nice to be with you, Chris.
You too, sir. Thank you. You're the nicest W&L grad I've ever met.
All right.
Okay. Washington and Lee. We've got some regional rivalry there for those who joined late. Take care, Ken. Well, Civil War, Meade at Gettysburg, and thank you again to Kent Masterson Brown for joining us and for a great conversation. Next week, we are going to have the last of our 4 encore episodes in a row. And we're bringing back our buddy Peter Hart, author of Foot Sloggers. Is this the third?
It's his kind of the end of his trilogy on different British units during the war. So he did one on an artillery unit, one on a tank unit, and this Foot Sloggers is his third and final one about an infantry battalion. And for those of you who might not remember, Peter was the former oral historian. Formerly was the oral historian for the Imperial War Museum. Had a chance to meet and talk to all these guys, and his books are very personal. Lots of
and he is a character. So if you have not seen a show with Peter Hart, or even if you have, and you want a little bit of excitement, mirth, kind of, He's not dull like we are. He is over the top. He also is he's a singer in a punk rock band.
Absolutely.
So what is their name?
Naughty Lumps, I think.
It's something like that. He's a sight to behold. So you should definitely come check that out. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Twitter, listen to our podcast, back us on patreon.com, and browse our website at historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.